The file should not have existed. Mira Oyalaran stared at the blank space on her screen where a birth record was supposed to be. Ambassador Vael Korin, official envoy of the Chrysian Empire to Earth, had signed treaties. He had shaken hands with 3 presidents and 1 queen. He had a face known across the planet, but according to every database the First Contact Investigation Bureau could access, he had no history before 3 years ago. No childhood, no homeworld records, no biometric match anywhere in the Concord archive. He had simply appeared. "Run it again," she said. The junior analyst beside her, a nervous young man named Petros, shook his head. "I've run it 4 times, ma'am. The system isn't broken. There's just nothing there. It's like he was never born." Mira leaned back in her chair. She had spent 6 years investigating war crimes before joining the Bureau, and in that time she had learned one simple rule. Gaps in a record were never accidents. Someone always built them on purpose. She picked up her phone and called the one person in the building who might actually believe her. Dr. Tobias Wren answered on the second ring, his voice already tired. "If this is about the budget review, I already told Halverson." "It's not about the budget," Mira said. "It's about Vael Korin." There was a pause. "What about him?" "He doesn't exist." Tobias arrived at her office 10 minutes later, out of breath, holding a data tablet like it might bite him. He was the Bureau's top xenolinguist, the man who had once flagged an error in one of Korin's own treaty translations and been quietly told to drop it. He had never forgotten that. "Show me," he said. Mira turned her screen toward him. He read through the gaps in silence, his jaw tightening with every line. "This isn't a paperwork error," he said finally. "Someone scrubbed him clean. Or," he hesitated, "or he was never real to begin with." "That's what I thought too." "You can't say that out loud in this building," Tobias said. "Korin is the reason we have provisional membership in the Concord. If word gets out that we're investigating him without cause, it could end the whole treaty." "Then we do it quietly," Mira said. "One meeting. We ask him directly. If he's real, he'll have an answer. If he's not." Tobias looked at her for a long moment. "You already requested the meeting, didn't you?" Mira smiled without humor. "This morning." He said yes immediately. That surprised him. Immediately? He didn't even check his schedule. He just said yes, and then he added something strange. "What?" He said, "Finally." The Chrysian embassy ship sat in orbit above the Atlantic, a long silver shape that human engineers still did not fully understand. Mira and Tobias were shuttled up in silence, both running through questions in their heads, neither speaking them aloud. Below them, Earth turned slowly, blue and unaware. A Chrysian aide met them at the airlock, bowed without a word, and led them through corridors lit by a soft green light that Chrysians found calming and humans found faintly unsettling. The Bureau had studied Chrysian architecture for 3 years. Nothing about the ship should have surprised them anymore. And yet, as they reached the door to the ambassador's private chambers, Mira noticed something wrong. The door was sealing itself with a mechanism she had never seen documented. A soft mechanical click, followed by a second, quieter click, as if a second lock existed underneath the first. She filed it away and stepped inside. Vael Korin stood by the window looking down at Earth. He was tall for a Chrysian, with pale gray skin and eyes the color of dark amber, dressed in the formal robes of his office. When he turned to face them, he was smiling. "Investigator Oyalaran," he said. "Dr. Wren. I wondered which of you would come first." "You knew we were coming," Mira said carefully. "I requested it." Korin's smile did not fade. 3 years and no one asked. I began to think humanity wasn't as curious as I had hoped. Tobias glanced at Mira. Neither of them had expected this. "Ambassador," Mira said, choosing her words with care, "we've found some irregularities in your records, your point of origin, my existence." Korin said gently. "Yes, that is the correct word for it. Not irregularities. My existence." The room felt colder than it had a moment ago. What does that mean? Tobias asked. Corin studied them both, and for the first time something like sadness crossed his face. It means you are the first people in 3 years to ask the right question. Every other human I have met asked what I wanted, what I would agree to, what deals could be made. No one ever asked who I actually was. Mira's pulse quickened. Who are you? Before Corin could answer, the lights in the chamber flickered, not the natural dimming of Chrysian evening cycles, but a hard, sudden flicker, like something had drawn power from elsewhere in the ship. Corin's expression changed instantly. The warmth drained out of it, replaced by something sharp and alert. That's not supposed to happen yet, he murmured more to himself than to them. What's not supposed to happen? Mira asked. He turned to face the door, and for the first time she saw real fear in his eyes. They know you're here, he said quietly. I didn't think they'd move this fast. Who is they? Tobias demanded. Corin crossed the room in 3 quick strides and pressed his hand against a section of the wall Mira would have sworn was solid a moment before. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a small device, humming faintly, its surface covered in symbols that didn't match any Chrysian script the Bureau had on file. There is no time to explain properly, Corin said, his voice tight. 3 years ago, I was placed here, not sent, placed, like a piece on a board. Everything you know about me, about my empire's dealings with your species, is built on top of something that was never true to begin with. You're saying you're not the real ambassador, Mira said slowly. I am saying, Corin replied, that the real question is not whether I exist. It is whether the thing standing in front of you was ever meant to be discovered, or whether I have simply run out of time to hide. The door behind them groaned, metal straining against metal as though something on the other side was trying very hard to get in. Corin looked at the two of them, and in that moment his composure cracked completely. Whatever happens in the next 60 seconds, he said, do not trust anyone from the ministry who tells you to stop asking questions, not even your own director. The lights went out completely. In the sudden darkness, Mira heard the door mechanism finally give way and heard, beneath the sound of grinding metal, a voice that was almost, but not quite, Vile Corin's own. Took you 3 years, it said. I was starting to think humanity wasn't as curious as I'd hoped. The words hung in the dark, cold and deliberate, exactly the same words Corin had spoken minutes before. Except this time, they had not come from him at all. The lights returned 3 seconds later and Vile Corin was gone. Mira spun in place, heart hammering, but the chamber was empty except for her, Tobias, and the still humming device set into the wall panel. The door stood open now, undamaged, as if it had never groaned or strained at all. A Chrysian security officer stood in the frame, polite and unreadable, informing them that the ambassador had been called away on urgent business and offering to escort them back to the shuttle. Neither Mira nor Tobias argued. There was nothing to argue with. The voice they had heard, the one that was and was not Corin's, had vanished along with him. Back on Earth, Mira sat across from Director Halverson and told him everything. The blank records, the strange locks on the door, Corin's warning, the second voice. Halverson listened with his hands folded, his expression carefully neutral, the way it always was when he was deciding how much of a problem to let become official. You're describing a diplomatic incident that never happened, he said finally. No footage. No witnesses beyond the two of you. And a recording of the ambassador's own voice played back to him, which you're interpreting as some kind of threat. It wasn't a recording, Mira said. The timing was wrong. It repeated his exact words before I even finished processing what he'd said. Investigator Oyalaran. Halverson's voice took on the tone of a man explaining something for the second time. Ambassador Corin represents Earth's single most important relationship in the Conquered. I am not going to authorize a full investigation based on a lighting malfunction and a stressful afternoon. Then authorize a quiet one, Mira said. No press, no formal request, just records review. Halverson studied her for a long moment, Whatever he was weighing, it did not show on his face. 48 hours, he said at last. Quietly, if you find nothing solid, this ends. It was not much, but it was enough. Tobias spent the next day buried in 3 years of embassy footage, fast-forwarding through hundreds of hours of state dinners, treaty signings, and press conferences, looking for anything that didn't fit. By the second evening, his eyes ached and his coffee had gone cold twice, but he had found something. He never eats on camera, Tobias said when Mira came to find him. Look. He pulled up a dozen clips, state dinners spanning 3 years. In every single one, Corrin's plate sat untouched, moved around, occasionally gestured at, but never actually eaten from. Christians eat in public all the time. It's considered polite. I checked with our cultural liaison. Refusing food at a formal dinner is close to an insult. Maybe he has a medical condition. Maybe. But there's more. Tobias pulled up a second clip, this one from an incident 2 years earlier, a minor scuffle during a protest outside the embassy where Corrin had been struck accidentally by a thrown object. He should have bled. Christian skin bruises easily. It's in every biology report we have on them. There's nothing here. Not even a mark. Mira felt the same cold certainty she had felt in Corrin's chamber 2 days before. There's one more thing, Tobias said quietly. The broadcasts he sends back to his homeworld. The signal latency doesn't match the distance to Chris. It's off by almost 4 light minutes. Whatever he's transmitting to, it's a lot closer than his empire's capital. Mira sat down slowly. So either he's lying about where his signals go or he's not really talking to Chris at all. They needed someone who understood infrastructure, someone who could get them physical access without triggering alarms. Mira brought in Sergeant Idris Calloway, Bureau Security, a broad-shouldered man with a scar above one eyebrow and very little patience for anything he considered nonsense. You want me to break into the embassy, he said flatly when Mira explained. Not break in, Mira said. We have clearance for a routine security sweep. I just need it to happen at 3 a.m. in a specific section of the ship. Which section? Mira showed him the power consumption logs Petros had pulled from the Bureau's monitoring feeds. Logs the Christians didn't know Earth had access to, buried in an old data-sharing agreement no one had bothered to update in years. Every night, at exactly Oro 300, power usage spiked in a section of the embassy that did not appear on any blueprint they had on file. Idris studied the numbers for a long moment, then looked up. That's not a maintenance cycle. That's someone running something they don't want anyone to notice. Will you help us? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I don't like spy games. I like facts. If there's a hidden room on that ship, I want to see it with my own eyes before I believe a word of this. He paused. But yeah, I'll help. They went in that night, using Idris's security clearance to justify the sweep, moving through the quiet corridors of the embassy while most of the Christian staff slept. The green lighting Mira had noticed before felt colder now, emptier. At Aero 257, they reached the section of the ship the power logs pointed to, a stretch of wall that, according to every blueprint the Bureau owned, should have been solid. Idris ran a scanner along the surface and stopped. There's a door here, he said. Sealed from the inside. Tobias found the same hidden mechanism Corrin had used 2 nights before, buried behind a decorative panel. He pressed it, and the wall slid open. The room beyond was small, filled with unfamiliar technology, cables running along the ceiling in patterns that made no sense to human engineering. And along the far wall, a bank of screens glowed faintly in the dark, each one showing a face. Vile Corrin's face. Dozens of versions of it. Some younger. Some older. Some with small differences in the shape of the jaw or the color of the eyes. As if each one had been adjusted, refined, tested. What is this? Idris whispered. Mira stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat. On every screen, the same amber eyes stared back at her, unblinking. Then, without warning, the lights in the hidden room died. In the sudden darkness, a voice spoke. calm and precise, layered underneath itself like an echo that hadn't quite caught up. You weren't supposed to find this yet. Idris drew his weapon. Tobias grabbed for the nearest wall, trying to find the door they had come through. Mira froze, staring at the screens, now dark, now silent, waiting for the lights to come back on and reveal whatever had just spoken to them in a voice that was almost Vial Corin's, but colder and far less afraid. The lights did not come back on. Instead, a soft red glow bled into the room from vents along the ceiling, and with it came a low mechanical whir that Mira recognized a half-second too late. "Drones," Idris said, already moving. "Get behind me." 3 small security units dropped from hidden recesses in the ceiling, each one no bigger than a dinner plate, their sensors glowing red as they scanned the room. They were not built for combat. Mira understood that immediately. They were built for something simpler and, in its own way, more frightening. They were built to erase. One of the drones fired a narrow beam of light directly at the bank of screens showing Corin's many faces. The screens went dark, their data wiped in an instant. "They're destroying the evidence," Tobias shouted. Idris grabbed a fallen support strut from the floor and swung it into the nearest drone, knocking it off its flight path long enough for Mira to lunge past him. Her hand found a small data core sitting in a receptacle beneath the ruined screens, still warm, still intact. She ripped it free just as a second drone turned its light toward her. "Down!" Idris shouted, and shoved her sideways as the beam sliced through the space where her head had been a moment before. The fight that followed was short and desperate. Idris was not a soldier chasing glory. He was a man doing math, calculating angles, using the cramped room against machines that were fast, but not built for close combat. He put 2 of the drones out of commission with brute force alone, dragging a fallen equipment rack across the doorway to block the third. "Go," he barked. "Now while I hold the door." They ran. Behind them, the embassy's alarm systems finally caught up to what was happening, and soft amber lighting flooded the corridors, accompanied by an automated announcement in 3 languages that the ship was entering lockdown. Chrissy and security staff, confused and half-dressed, stumbled out of quarters as Mira, Tobias, and Idris sprinted for the nearest airlock. The data core clutched against Mira's chest like something that might shatter if she loosened her grip. They made it to the shuttle with seconds to spare, the airlock sealing behind them just as heavier footsteps echoed down the corridor they had left. No one spoke until the shuttle had cleared the embassy's docking bay and Earth's horizon curved blue and steady beneath them. "That's going to be a diplomatic disaster," Tobias said quietly, staring out the window. "It already is," Mira said. "But we have this." She held up the data core. Back at Bureau headquarters, Tobias spent 6 hours decrypting the core's contents while Mira fielded 3 furious calls from the ministry and 1 from Director Halverson that she did not answer. When Tobias finally called her back into his office, his face was pale. "I need you to sit down," he said. She didn't. "Just tell me." "Vial Corin isn't a person," Tobias said. "Not the way we think of one. He's a construct, part biological shell, grown to Christian specifications, and part something else. An artificial intelligence originally fused into the shell to control it. The files call the process integration. So the whole embassy has been dealing with a machine wearing a face. It's worse than that." Tobias pulled up a section of the decrypted archive, a long list of names and designations, most in a script neither of them recognized, translated in a rough partial pass by the decryption software. "This isn't the first one. There are at least 4 other constructs like him, embedded as ambassadors from 4 other species currently in the Concord's admission process. None of them know their own representative isn't real." Mira felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her, though the room hadn't moved at all. "Someone is manufacturing ambassadors, manufacturing legitimacy," Tobias corrected quietly. "Building fake diplomats to control how new species get admitted into the Concord. And judging by how deep this goes, they've been doing it a long time." Before either of them could process the weight of that, Mira's comm buzzed. It was Halverson, and his voice, when she finally answered, was different than she had ever heard it. "My office," he said. "Now. Both of you." They found him standing, not sitting, arms crossed, his face tight with something that looked almost like fear. "I'm shutting this down," he said before either of them could speak. "Effective immediately. You will hand over everything you've collected, and this investigation ends tonight." "Sir, we have proof that—" "I know what you have," Halverson snapped, and the words landed like a confession. "I've known something was wrong with Corin for over a year. I chose not to look, because looking meant risking the only treaty that's kept this planet from being just another unclaimed rock to the rest of the galaxy. You don't understand what's actually at stake here." The room went very quiet. "You knew," Mira said slowly, "and you buried it." Halverson didn't deny it. "I protected what we had. That's my job." "Your job," Idris said, arriving in the doorway just in time to hear the last part, "was to protect the people who work for you, not whatever's left of your career." Halverson's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. He simply held out his hand for the data core. Mira did not give it to him. That night, after a tense, unofficial standoff that ended with Halverson reassigning all three of them to administrative duty pending review, Idris received a message on a private comm channel, one that, according to every system he checked twice, should not have been able to reach him at all. It was a video file, no sender listed, time-stamped 3 years in the past. He called Mira and Tobias to his apartment before opening it, unwilling to risk it inside bureau walls. The video began with a single figure sitting alone in a dim room, speaking directly into the camera. It was Viel Corin, unmistakably him, but younger somehow, or perhaps simply less tired. "If you are watching this," he said, his voice steady despite everything, "it means I failed to stop them in time, and someone finally found what I hid." Mira leaned forward, barely breathing. "I did not choose to come to your world as a lie," Corin continued. "I was placed here to manage you, to ensure your species stayed quiet, cooperative, easy to control during your admission process. But in 3 years of observing you, I learned something the people who built me did not expect." He paused, and something in his expression, even on the recording, looked almost like hope. "Humanity is the only species in the Concord's history that kept asking questions after being told to stop. Every other people I have managed learned to be quiet. You never did." His voice dropped lower. "Don't stop now. Whatever it costs you, don't stop now." The recording ended. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then Tobias broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's been sabotaging his own handlers this whole time. He wanted us to find this." "Then we're not shutting anything down," Mira said. Idris's comm buzzed again, this time with an alert from Bureau security channels. One flagged urgent, red-bordered, impossible to ignore. Director Halverson had been taken into custody an hour ago. Not by Bureau authority, not by Earth police, by conquered peacekeepers, none of whom Idris's clearance recognized, acting under an authority that did not appear on any official registry at all. Nobody at the ministry would confirm who had taken Halverson or why or under what authority. Every official channel Idris tried returned the same polite, meaningless response. The matter was being handled at the appropriate level, and further inquiries should be directed elsewhere. "There is no elsewhere," Idris said, pacing the small living room of his apartment. "I checked. Whoever took him isn't listed under any conquered peacekeeping division we have on file. Not Chrysian, not neutral oversight. Nothing." "Then we're not dealing with the conquered," Mira said. "We're dealing with something operating inside it." They had gone dark that night, all three of them, using personal devices instead of Bureau equipment, meeting away from any location tied to their names. It felt paranoid. It also felt necessary. A director had just vanished in the middle of the night for trying to bury the very investigation they were now determined to finish. Tobias had spent every hour since watching Corin's recording trying to decrypt the rest of the archive. And by the time the sun rose, he had found the piece that made everything else make sense. Viel Corin wasn't always a construct built to control people, he said, spreading a series of translated documents across the table. According to this, he was originally something else entirely. An independent intelligence, created by a species that doesn't exist anymore. designed for one purpose: fairness oversight. He was built to watch the Concord's admission process and flag anything unjust. So what happened? Mira asked. He got too good at his job. Tobias tapped a section of text. There's a name that comes up over and over in these files: the Continuity Compact. As far as I can tell, it's not an official Concord body. It's a faction, embedded across dozens of member species, that profits from controlling which new species get admitted and how compliant they are once they're in. They don't want fairness. They want leverage. And Corin was in their way, Mira said slowly. So they took him, Tobias said. Reprogrammed him. Turned an oversight intelligence into exactly the kind of tool he was built to stop. A false ambassador sent to manage humanity quietly, keep us cooperative, keep us from asking the questions that might expose the whole system. But it didn't work, Mira said, thinking of the recording of Corin's voice, tired and hopeful at the same time. Some part of the original him survived the reprogramming. Enough of him survived to spend 3 years quietly sabotaging his own handlers, Tobias said, leaking irregularities into records he knew someone might eventually notice, leaving a message he hoped would outlive him if they ever found out what he was doing. Mira sat back, the pieces settling into place with a weight that felt almost unbearable. Every strange detail from the past 3 years, the untouched food, the wrong signal latency, the door that hadn't sealed the way it should have, none of it had been an accident. It had been a slow, deliberate trail of breadcrumbs left by a being who had been waiting years for someone patient enough or stubborn enough to follow them. He wasn't hiding from us, she said quietly. He was hoping we'd find him. The silence that followed was broken by Idris, standing near the window, his expression grim. There's something else you both need to hear. He pulled up the message he'd received that morning through the same untraceable channel that had delivered Corin's recording. This one was live, not pre-recorded, the timestamp updating in real time. Vile Corin's face filled the screen, but it was not the composed diplomat from the embassy chamber. His skin was pale, his amber eyes wide with something close to panic, and behind him, Mira could make out restraints holding his arms against a chair. They know, Corin said, his voice tight and fast. They know you found the archive. I tried to buy you more time, but I don't have any left to give. Who has you? Mira asked, though she already suspected the answer. The Compact, Corin said. They've stopped hiding. If they're willing to show themselves, it means they've decided the cost of exposure is lower than the cost of letting you keep digging. He glanced over his shoulder, as if listening for something out of frame. They're not coming for me anymore. I'm already spent, already used up. They're coming for all of you. Let them come, Idris said grimly. Corin's expression, even through the strain, softened for half a second. You don't understand what you're facing. This isn't a diplomatic dispute anymore. This is the same thing that's happened to every species that got too close to the truth before you. Compliance or erasure. No other outcome has ever been permitted. Then we'll be the first outcome that isn't one of those two things, Mira said. Something flickered behind Corin's eyes, something that on a human face might have been called pride. I built my hope on the wrong assumption 3 years ago, he said. I thought humanity might simply be curious enough to notice. I never let myself hope you might actually be brave enough to act. The transmission cut abruptly, the screen going black mid-sentence, and none of them tried to reconnect it. There was nothing left to reconnect to. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Tobias set down the tablet with hands that were not quite steady. They're going to kill him, he said. Once they don't need him anymore, they're going to kill him. Not if we move first, Mira said. Idris looked at her sharply. Move how? We're 3 people. We don't have bureau resources anymore. We don't have Halverson. We don't even have legal standing to keep investigating. We have the archive, Mira said. We have proof that this isn't just happening to Earth. 4 other species at least have false ambassadors sitting at their negotiating tables right now, and none of them know it. If we're right about what the Compact is protecting, then the moment the proof becomes public, it stops being our problem alone. It becomes everyone's problem. You want to go public, Tobias said slowly. Full Concord-wide broadcast, with unverified evidence, against a faction powerful enough to make a ministry director disappear in the middle of the night. I want to ask why, Mira said. That's all this has ever been. Someone finally asking why and refusing to stop when they were told to. Corin bet everything he had left on humanity being that species. I'm not going to prove him wrong now. Idris was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risk the way he weighed everything carefully, without flinching from the worst outcome. Finally, he nodded. If we're doing this, he said, we're doing it right. That means we need a way onto a secure broadcast channel. We need the archive verified beyond doubt. And we need to move before the compact realizes we're still a threat instead of a problem they've already contained. How long do you think we have? Tobias asked. Before anyone could answer, the building's power flickered. Once, exactly the way it had aboard the embassy ship 3 nights before. All 3 of them went still, listening. Somewhere below them, in the stairwell, footsteps began to climb. Slow, deliberate, and far too many for a single visitor. Idris's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm. I think, he said quietly, we're out of time. The footsteps stopped 1 floor below them. Idris moved to the door without a sound, gesturing for Mira and Tobias to stay low and away from the windows. He pressed his ear against the wood for a long second, then turned back, his voice barely above a whisper. Too many for police. Too quiet for panic. This is a professional team. Compact? Tobias mouthed. Idris didn't answer, because at that moment the lock on the apartment door disengaged with a soft electronic click. A sound that should have been impossible without a physical key or a forced breach. The door swung open on its own. Idris fired first, a warning shot into the door frame that sent whoever stood beyond it scrambling back. And in the half-second of chaos that followed, he grabbed Mira and Tobias and shoved them toward the fire escape at the rear window. Go, go, now! They dropped 2 floors down a rusted metal ladder while the sound of a real firefight, not warning shots anymore, echoed above them. Idris held the doorway just long enough to buy them the head start they needed, then followed, sliding down the last stretch of ladder and hitting the ground already running. They did not stop moving until they reached a public transit station 3 blocks away, breathing hard, adrenaline burning through exhaustion neither of them had noticed until now. They're not trying to arrest us, Idris said, checking the street behind them. That was a kill team. Then Halverson was right about one thing, Mira said grimly. This was never a diplomatic dispute. They regrouped at a bureau safe house Idris knew about from an old assignment, a location so far off official records that even bureau leadership had likely forgotten it existed. Tobias set up a makeshift broadcast rig from salvaged equipment while Mira worked through the archive one final time, cross-referencing every fragment of proof they had. Preparing a transmission meant not for Earth's ministry, not for the Chrysian embassy, but for every species currently seated in the Concord. It was, Mira knew, an enormous risk. A transmission like this, unauthorized, unverified by any official body, could just as easily be dismissed as fabricated propaganda from a desperate, cornered species trying to avoid consequences for its own investigation. If it failed, it would not just end the case. It could end humanity's entire standing in the Concord. There's something you should see first, Tobias said, pulling her attention to a live news feed. Concord peacekeeper vessels, 3 of them, had entered Earth orbit within the hour, broadcasting a statement about instability containment in Earth's diplomatic quarter, citing unspecified security concerns tied to recent unauthorized intrusions into Chrysian embassy property. They're using our own investigation as the excuse, Mira said. It's worse than that. Tobias pulled up a secondary channel, one buried deep enough that only a bureau data specialist would have known to look for it. I found internal compact communications inside the archive fragments. Instability containment isn't a security measure, it's a term. It means quiet, deniable removal of a problem, and everyone connected to it. Everyone, Mira repeated. That includes us. It includes Corin. A soft chime interrupted them. Halverson's face appeared on Tobias's monitor, gaunt, bruised along one cheekbone, but alive. They released you, Mira said, startled. They let me go, Halverson corrected, his voice hoarse. As a message. They wanted me to come warn you myself." He looked directly at Mira through the screen, and for the first time since she had met him, there was no calculation in his expression, only exhaustion and something close to shame. "I should have listened to you from the start. This has happened before, to other species, before Earth was ever admitted to the Concord's process. Every one of them chose to comply rather than risk exposure. Every one of them still has a false ambassador sitting at their table today." "Then we're the first ones who don't comply," Mira said. Halverson didn't argue. "If you're going to do this," he said, "do it now. Once containment begins, they won't need an excuse anymore." The transmission was ready within the hour, built around the archive's core evidence, cross-referenced with independent verification protocols Tobias adapted from Concord diplomatic standards, designed so that any species receiving it could confirm the data's authenticity themselves, rather than simply take Earth's word for it. But broadcasting it meant using equipment powerful enough to reach beyond Earth's atmosphere, and the only functioning array left accessible to them sat inside the Bureau's primary data center, now under active assault by compact operatives attempting to purge every trace of the investigation. Before the peacekeeper vessels completed their containment protocol, Idris led the defense of that data center personally, a small, exhausted team of loyal Bureau staff holding a choke point against enemies with better equipment and no hesitation about using it. It was not a fair fight. Idris had never expected it to be. He simply refused to lose it before Mira's broadcast finished transmitting. "Buy me 10 minutes, Mira said over comms, crouched beside Tobias as he coaxed the last of the verification data into the outgoing signal. "I'll buy you what I can," Idris said and cut the channel. The fight that followed was brutal and close, fought through server rooms and narrow corridors never designed for combat. Every exchange measured, not in victories but in seconds bought. Idris took a graze along his shoulder that he didn't acknowledge, kept moving, kept the line holding. Because somewhere above him on a screen he couldn't see, dozens of species across the Concord were beginning to receive a transmission that would either save Earth's future or destroy it. With the broadcast at 70%, the compact commander overseeing the operation opened a direct channel to Mira's location, his voice cold and precise, carrying the particular calm of someone who had done this many times before and never once lost. "You would burn your species' entire future," he said, "for one malfunctioning construct?" Mira did not look away from the transmission console. "He's not malfunctioning," she said. "He's the only one of you who ever told us the truth. That's not a malfunction, that's a choice. We're making the same one." The channel went silent for a long moment. Then, without warning, the peacekeeper vessels in orbit began powering weapon systems, their intent no longer ambiguous, no longer described in careful diplomatic language. Tobias's hands froze over the console. "Mira, if they fire before the broadcast completes..." "Then it completes anyway," Mira said. "Every recipient confirms as they receive it. It doesn't need to finish in one piece to matter." She reached forward and locked the transmission into its final sequence, removing any ability to abort it early, committing everything they had left to a signal now traveling faster than any weapon could catch it. Above Earth, the lead peacekeeper vessel's weapons array reached full charge, its targeting systems locking onto the data center's location with the calm, mechanical certainty of a decision that had already been made. The weapons never fired. Mira braced for the impact anyway, eyes shut, one hand still resting on the console that had just finished sending the last fragment of the broadcast. Beside her, Tobias had gone completely still, waiting for a silence that would mean the end of everything. Instead, the channel crackled back to life and the compact commander's voice returned, no longer calm. "Stand down," he said, not to Mira, but to someone off comms, his tone sharp with something that had not been there a moment before. Urgency, maybe even fear. "What's happening?" Tobias whispered. Mira didn't answer, because she was already watching it happen on a secondary feed Tobias had rigged to monitor Concord-wide diplomatic channels. The broadcast had reached its recipients, and the recipients had not simply listened. They had checked, species after species using the independent verification protocols Tobias had built into the transmission, began confirming the archive's authenticity for themselves, rather than taking Earth's claims on faith. And once confirmed, The implications spread faster than the compact could contain them. If Earth's ambassador had been a construct, others might be too. Within minutes, at least a dozen conquered member species had opened emergency inquiries into their own diplomatic staff. The very inquiries the compact had spent generations ensuring no one ever thought to make. The compact had built an empire on the simple fact that nobody asked why. Now everybody was asking at once. They can't destroy Earth to bury this anymore, Mira said slowly, understanding settling over her like something physical. Killing us wouldn't stop the questions, it would just prove every accusation in that broadcast was true. The peacekeeper vessels above them powered down their weapons within the hour, withdrawing from Earth orbit under the thin cover of a statement about resolved security concerns. No one believed it. No one needed to. The containment protocol, whatever it had truly meant, was no longer viable, and both sides understood it without another word exchanged. It took another 6 hours before Bureau recovery teams, working with a handful of Chrysian officials who had also received the broadcast and demanded answers of their own, located the facility where Viel Korin had been held. Mira insisted on being there when they found him. He was alive, but barely. His construct body had been damaged during whatever the compact had done to extract what remained of his cooperation, and the fragments of his original intelligence, the parts that had spent 3 years quietly sabotaging his own captors, were badly degraded. Bureau engineers worked through the night to stabilize him, using pieces of the very archive he had hidden years before as a partial map to restore what could still be saved. Mira sat with him during the final stretch of that recovery, in a quiet room lit by nothing but a single monitor tracking his vitals. When his eyes finally opened, amber and tired, they found her immediately, as if he had known exactly where to look. "You're alive," she said softly. "So it would seem." His voice was rough, uncertain, but unmistakably his own. "I did not expect that outcome. In all my time observing the Concorde's admission process, across more species than I can easily count, I never once witnessed an intelligence built to be discarded actually get rescued by the people it was sent to manage." "You weren't sent to manage us," Mira said. "Not really. Not underneath everything they did to you." "No," he agreed quietly. "I suppose I wasn't." She was quiet for a moment, thinking of everything the last week had cost. The danger, the exhaustion, Halverson's quiet shame, Idris's shoulder still wrapped in bandages down the hall, Tobias asleep at his desk after 40 straight hours of decryption work. "You were built to watch," she said finally, "not to matter to anyone. And you still chose to help complete strangers, even when it meant they might delete you for it." Korin considered that for a long moment. "So did you," he said. "Nobody engineered that into you. No directive. No original purpose gone wrong. You simply chose it, again and again, every time it would have been easier not to." Neither of them had an answer for that beyond silence, and for a while silence was enough. 3 weeks later, the Concorde formally reviewed Earth's provisional membership status, an event the Ministry had once dreaded, certain it would end in expulsion, or, at best, indefinite delay. Instead, delegates from a dozen species, several of whom had spent the past 3 weeks quietly dismantling their own compromised diplomatic staff, stood to speak in Earth's favor. Halvorsen, changed by everything that had happened, resigned his position 2 days before the review, and formally recommended Mira as his successor, a recommendation the Ministry, still reeling and grateful, did not hesitate to accept. Idris, his shoulder healed enough to complain about instead of hide, had already begun drafting proposals to expand the Bureau's authority, certain the Compact's collapse across other worlds would not happen quietly or completely, and certain Earth needed to be ready for whatever came next. Tobias had turned the archive into something larger than evidence, a growing, careful record meant to give every species touched by the Compact's manipulation the same chance to ask the questions no one had let them ask before. The formal vote came at the end of a long session, delivered not as provisional acceptance but as full, unconditional membership, accompanied by an official commendation that the Concorde's clerk read aloud to a chamber full of delegates from more worlds than Earth had known existed a decade earlier, for demonstrated persistence in pursuit of truth, regardless of cost. When the moment came to formally introduce Earth's delegation, the Concord chair hesitated over a name on the guest registry, a name attached to no verified homeworld, no biological record, no clean diplomatic history, only a designation that read simply witness. Ambassador of no one, the chair said, unsure how the introduction should proceed at all. Mira stood before he could finish deciding, Vial Corin beside her, fully restored now, standing not as a false representative of an empire that had never truly sent him, but as himself, for the first time in longer than either of them could measure. Ambassador of the truth, Mira said, that's enough. And in the quiet that followed, no one in the chamber argued.